All right, so today Ally is honored to be hosting Representative Judy Chu, an Asian American Congresswoman representing California's 27th district. Throughout her decades in public service as a college professor, senator, and congresswoman, she has been a champion for women's rights, civil liberties, and Asian Americans. So without further ado, I'm going to give the floor to Judy Chu.
Well, thank you so much, Ally. And what I knew before as the future Chinese leaders of America here in the San Gabriel Valley, for hosting today's incredibly important conversation, and to all of you for taking part. I know that the social distancing requirements have been very difficult for so many of us, but that is why events like today's, which helps us stay connected, means so much to me. And it's especially exciting to be able to talk to the next generation of Chinese American leaders. You see, when I was younger, I never imagined I would run for office. That's because I never saw anybody who looked like me. But that began to change in college after somebody handed me a flyer for what was then an experimental class in Asian American Studies. What I learned made a light go off in my head. I learned about discriminatory actions taken by our federal government, like the Chinese Exclusion Act of 1882 and the imprisonment of innocent Japanese Americans during World War II. I learned how these actions could affect whole generations of people psychologically, causing post-traumatic stress, feelings of marginalization, and low self-esteem. I came to understand why my parents were so silent about the past, even though it affected them so deeply. I took many more classes like that and then got involved with civil rights issues on campus. And then, years later, an ugly anti-immigrant English-only movement occurred in the town I was living in and still live in, Monterey Park. A vocal group of longtime residents resented the new immigrants moving in and wanted English only for the signs in the city and only English books in the library. The last straw was when they got a resolution in the city council saying that only English should be spoken in the city. Well, when that passed, there were so many like me that said, enough is enough. I joined a multi-ethnic coalition to fight this resolution and helped lead an effort to get thousands of signatures on petitions to overturn it. Finally, we succeeded, but it then became so apparent that the city council did not represent the city. So I ran for city council and won, and I served there for 13 years working to bring people together and becoming mayor. I was so gratified when the fruits of my labor were rewarded when we won the grand prize by the League of California Cities for innovation in addressing diversity. Then a vacancy occurred for the state assembly seat in my district. But when I decided to run, I was quickly blocked by the Old Boys Network. You see, the establishment chose their candidate, and it certainly wasn't me. Because of their powerful backing, the Speaker of the Assembly at that time did not support me either. Things looked very bleak. But then there was a turning point in my campaign, and I remember it well. It was the moment that a mentor came to help me. It was then Congresswoman Hilda Solis. She had gone against the establishment herself. When she ran for Congress, it was against an entrenched, longtime male incumbent, and she faced many naysayers in her campaign, but she persevered. I supported her in that race, and she never forgot it. She also never forgot what it was like to go against the establishment. And so her support gave me the momentum I needed, and I won that state assembly seat. And then one day, President Obama made a lightning bolt of an announcement. He announced his selection of Hilda Solis to be his choice for Secretary of Labor. It opened up the congressional seat, and I decided to run. It was an extremely tough primary. There were naysayers that said someone like me, an Asian American woman, could not win this seat. But I persisted. On July 14th, 2009, I won, but the day after, something even more amazing happened. President Obama called me from the White House to congratulate me on becoming the first Chinese American woman elected to Congress in history. As you begin your professional careers, you may also face naysayers who tell you that you can't or shouldn't do something. But they were wrong when they said this to me, and they are wrong if they say it to you. America needs leaders like you who can be strong voices, whether it is for the Asian American Pacific Islander community or whether it is for the policies that benefit all Americans. Your voices are too important to not be heard. But not only that, when AAPIs don't use our voice, we lose our seat at the table. And when we don't have a seat at the table, that's when terrible policies like the Chinese Exclusion Act can be passed into law. Fortunately, things have been changing from the days when AAPIs were invisible in the US Capitol. AAPIs are now the fastest growing racial population in the country. Over the past decade, we've had more AAPIs run for office and get elected than ever before. And as a result, we now have a record 20 AAPI members of Congress, our highest number in history. But not only that, AAPIs have more than doubled our voter registration numbers over the last decade. And by 2044, we will have even doubled those numbers. We are also the swing vote in key swing states all across the nation. So that's why I like to say we've gone from being marginalized to the margin of victory. That makes us very influential, and it is an opportunity for all AAPIs to get involved. Over the past few months, I've been inspired to see so many young people from all backgrounds marching in the streets in peaceful protests and making their voices heard. These are the leaders of tomorrow and fill me with so much hope for the future. And as a growing demographic, AAPIs have such an important part to play in this because we know that injustice against any community of color is an injustice against all of us. And that's why I, as chair of the Congressional Asian Pacific American Caucus, have made it a priority to show that we are standing together with our colleagues in the Congressional Black, Hispanic, and Native American caucuses. And that is why I had our caucus endorse the historic George Floyd Justice and Policing Act and immediately organized a press conference of the Congressional Black, Hispanic, Native American caucuses and our caucus, of course, to condemn the police brutality that led to the murder of George Floyd. That was especially important since one of the officers who was involved in George Floyd's murder was Asian American, and initially there was tension between the Black and Asian American communities. Well, as chair of CAPAC, I stood with the Congressional Black Caucus in their efforts to fight racism, not only because it's the right thing to do, but because the AAPI community knows the sting of racial prejudice as well. We are feeling that right now as anti-Asian hate crimes are spiking due to the coronavirus pandemic. Since the beginning of this year, AAPIs all across this nation have been terrified with the rise of anti-Asian coronavirus hate crimes and incidents in which innocent AAPIs were targeted with racism and violence. It started in January with dirty looks, insults, and misinformation that Asian American restaurants and businesses were more likely to have the disease and should be avoided. But in the last few months, it's escalated to spitting, yelling, and physical attacks against Asian Americans all across this nation. This xenophobia has been exacerbated by President Donald Trump, who's been trying to direct anger at China in order to deflect blame for his delayed and failed response to the pandemic. He and his followers have repeatedly used the term Chinese virus or China plague, and even now Kung flu, to refer to coronavirus, even though health experts at the CDC and the World Health Organization have repeatedly warned not to associate the disease with a specific geographic location or ethnicity due to the stigma it causes. And the impact has been stark. According to one survey, 77% of Americans blame China for the coronavirus. And a new survey released a couple of weeks ago shows that approximately 40% of Asian Americans have reported adverse experiences due to their race or ethnicity since the pandemic began. And various AAPI hate crime reporting sites have found that over 2,300 anti-Asian hate incidents and crimes have been reported in recent months, including an incident in Texas where a family of 3 was stabbed at a Sam's Club, including 2 children, ages 2 and 6, by a man who was saying that he wanted to kill Asian Americans. So what have we done? Well, we in CAPAC, our Congressional Asian Caucus, have done a number of things. We've taken President Trump and his followers on every time they use the term Chinese virus or Wuhan virus or the racial slur Kung Flu. We've issued statements, written letters to the White House, held press conferences to denounce such racist terminology. We've taken actions in Congress as well, introducing a congressional resolution to condemn anti-Asian coronavirus hate crimes and incidents, and got an anti-hate crime bill, the No Hate Act, passed out of the House. I also was incredibly gratified to have the support of my colleagues in the Congressional Black, Hispanic, and Native American caucuses who joined me in press conferences to call out anti-Asian xenophobia. That unity in the face of prejudice is what we can achieve when more people from diverse backgrounds get involved in politics. And that's why I want to encourage all of you to get involved and be a force for change. Whether it's getting engaged in your local community, the way I did when fighting the English-only resolution in Monterey Park, or registering to vote, or making your voice heard in the ballot box, you have the ability to create social and political change in this country. We've come a long way as a nation, but there is so much work left to do. And it's your generation that will be able to bridge many of the divides and work together to uplift each other in ways that are more important now than ever as we address centuries of systemic racism and inequality in this country. So thank you. And I know that all of you have great futures ahead of you. I look forward to seeing more from you as the years progress. So thank you all so very much.
All right, so we'll now be moving on to Q&A, if that's all right.
Yes.
All right, Justin, you have the floor.
All right, so first we want to get started with one of the most common questions that some of our attendees have had. How has your work changed since the COVID-19 pandemic started?
Oh my goodness, it's changed so dramatically. First of all, since the stay-at-home orders have been announced, we have been working from home, and in fact, we have ordered our staffs to work from home. And we return to Washington, D.C. only when votes are called. That's to reduce the exposure that we have to one another and to make sure that we can keep safe. So the way in which we are conducting business has changed very dramatically. And as a result, I'm often attending congressional hearings. I'm often having meetings with constituents, but it's all on Zoom. So I'm just Zooming all day long. And we have been able to work together on computer screens instead of being in giant committee rooms together. The other difficulty in terms of how we work is how to vote, because we can't do what we did before, which is have huge congregations of us on the floor of Congress to vote. So now we vote in shifts. It takes a long time to do it. And we only can have a certain amount of people on the floor at a time. The other thing that we've changed is to be able to vote by proxy. So for those who have vulnerabilities, they are able to assign their vote to another, and that will count as an official vote. of course, the most dramatic thing that we have been doing pandemic is on the content of what we do, because we know that the issues that Americans are facing are very, very stark, from facing the coronavirus itself with 140,000 people now dead, to the fact that so many businesses have shut down and so many people have lost their jobs. As a result, we have spent nearly all of our time on COVID relief bills. And now we have had 5 COVID relief bills that have amounted to $3 trillion, an mind-boggling amount of money, but necessary for us to make sure that we can deal with the effects of this crisis. So these monies have addressed such things as making sure that we have monies for the hospitals and our medical system to treat patients, having enough monies for PPE, as well as ventilators equipment that we need, having the means by which to test, which means all those reagents and the kinds of swabs that you need to make those successful. We have had the economic relief monies that went out to each individual. We also have had a very extensive unemployment program so that there could be extended unemployment and more unemployment for each person. And of course, for small businesses, we've done quite a few programs, including PPP, which is the payment protection program, where people who had small businesses could apply and then get their loans forgiven if they are able to fulfill certain criteria. So there has been so much that we have done, but we still have more to do. In fact, we passed another bill called the HEROES Act out of the House, but it has not been taken up by the Senate. But this is a bill that is so important. For one thing, you know that the unemployment is going to run out by the end of this month. We're talking about 2 weeks from now. What are all these people who are unemployed going to do? And we know that $1,200 only goes so far. That was what was in the economic relief that was given to each individual. So we need to make sure that passes. Also, there are many people who can't pay their rent, and we have rent relief and mortgage relief in this HEROES Act. So there is so much that needs to be done. I'm actually returning back to Washington, D.C. tomorrow. And it is my hope that in the 2 weeks in which we have votes in Congress, that we will be able to get this HEROES Act passed, and so that Americans can get the relief that they need.
Very inspiring work, definitely. Now our second question: what are some effective strategies to make our voices heard?
Well, it is so important to make sure that you do raise your voices. And let's just talk about one aspect of it, and that is these anti-Asian hate crimes and incidents. We want to make sure that we make our voices heard about what's going on there. That's really kind of front and center in terms of what's happening now. First of all, in terms of AAPIs, we want to make sure that everybody who experiences a hate crime or incident reports it. Now, there are those AAPIs who think, oh, you know, what I experienced is maybe too small of a thing, or maybe I shouldn't report because then I'm going to get retribution. No, it's important for everybody to report, and you can go to the website called Stop AAPI Hate and report there. And in fact, it can be done in 10 languages. So that everybody, even if you have limited English proficiency, can report. And it's important to do that so we know what's going on, but also so that you don't feel isolated, so the victims out there don't feel isolated. One of the worst things you could do is isolate people who are experiencing something as terrible as that. The other thing you can do is to do bystander intervention. Actually, what we've done is to have our advocates train people out there across America to engage in bystander intervention. And there are the 5 Ds of bystander intervention. If you see a hate crime incident or incident being done, these 5 Ds are distract, delegate, document, delay, and direct. And these are different strategies for stopping these kinds of hate crimes or incidents. Of course, doing it only if you can make sure that you are safe, but also in documenting it, because those are the ways that we have really seen how these things are occurring, and many of those have gone viral. So that is extremely important. And here's what I really have to emphasize: building coalitions of support. Because you know what? We can't be in our own little bubble while all this is happening. We have to build coalitions of support with allies who are hearing what's going on and saying, this is wrong. That's why I told you all these stories about having partnerships with the Congressional Black Caucus, Congressional Hispanic Caucus, and the Congressional Native American Caucus. And I want to tell you that groups like, for instance, the Jewish group, the Anti-Defamation League, were the first to call me when they heard about all these terrible anti-Asian hate crimes and incidents. So it's having effective coalitions with allies that can make these things stop, where we can have a way to fight these things and to make sure that there is an equal and just America. But you know what? I tell you, what we can always do is to make sure that we are involved in our local government, in our state government, and in our federal government. So it's getting involved in our democracy, making sure that you are exercising your right to vote, that you are registered to vote, and that on important issues, you make your voices heard and say something about it.
Very important information, definitely during this pandemic. Even though you've already talked about this in your introduction and in the last question, what are some strategies to confront racism against Asian Americans, definitely during this pandemic?
So maybe let me say more about these 5 Ds of bystander intervention. You know, this applies anytime you see terrible discrimination or racism against anybody, but now it's occurring quite a bit against Asian Americans, of course. So what are those 5 Ds? Well, you see somebody doing some ranting and raving against an Asian American. 1D is distract. You know, throw your keys on the ground, and then, you know, you startle everybody, and then maybe you can just distract this person from the ranting and the raving. Delegate. How about finding an authority figure and saying, hey, this thing is happening, get them to stop it, please. Document. Pull out the old iPhone and document what you are seeing. Make sure you're safe, though. Direct. Having a direct intervention, saying stop that, and just having that direct comment to people. By the way, I don't know if you saw this one, talking about direct. In San Francisco, an Asian American family was simply eating at a restaurant, minding their own business. And a white male, believe it or not, a CEO of a tech company, started ranting and raving at them, just saying the most vile, ugly things. This just happened a couple of weeks ago. I couldn't believe it because somebody documented, so I was able to see it. And what happened? A white waitress confronted him. She said, stop that. You are not allowed to do that. These are respected guests of our restaurant, and stop it. And so she did stop it, actually. And it was funny because she was just doing it out of the goodness of her heart. But then somebody started a GoFundMe site, and she got $100,000 in that GoFundMe site. So, I mean, those are good role models for people who are trying to do something. And yes, she did kick that racist out of the restaurant, and he is banned for life from that restaurant. And now, of course, everybody's condemned him as well. And then there's the final D, which is delay. Now, what does that mean? Sometimes something happens so fast that you don't have time to react. But you know what? I tell you, if you see somebody who's been the victim of something like that, it can feel so isolating for that victim. If you just went over and said, "Are you all right? You know, can I lend a helping hand? That was terrible." That goes a long way. That goes a long way in just offering your empathy.
Very insightful, very insightful. Definitely considering the amount of attacks that have occurred against AAPIs. Now our next question. Considering that you are the first Chinese American to be elected in the Congress, how as a woman and a minority did you get to where you are in the vicious male-dominated world of politics?
Well, one thing that we AAPIs face is the perpetual foreigner stereotype. And that is, when I first ran in the city of Monterey Park, there were people who assumed that I was born elsewhere, that I did not speak English, and that if elected, the only ones I wanted to represent were Asians. You know, well, that was so far from the truth, and that is, I was born here. Of course, English is actually the only language I know very well. Unfortunately, I wish I knew more Chinese. But, and then of course, actually I relished the idea. I wanted to be able to get elected to the office so that I could represent everybody. I wanted to make sure that I could represent the needs of all the people in the city of Monterey Park. And of course, on a national level, I felt that as well, that I want to make sure that I help those who really need the help. So I did have to work hard to overcome that. I do have to say that then when I tried to go to higher office, I encountered that Old Boys Network. And that's where it is so important to find allies, to find people who will believe in you, who believe in a more diverse political system, who think that those seated at the table should look like America. And there are people like that out there. I found it with Hilda Solis. She became my mentor, and that's the other thing, finding mentors, people who know something about the world of politics, who can help you and who can then guide you along as you are fighting the establishment.
Very, very useful information, considering that many people are trying to get involved and are trying to break these barriers.
Mm-hmm.
Now, especially during the pandemic, what are some things that you have done or planning to do to give back to the minority community and women in your district?
Well, there's so much going on. For one thing, as far as the pandemic, we know that communities of color are being disproportionately affected. Actually, in terms of the mortality rate, Blacks and Hispanics have a mortality rate that is 2 to 3 times higher than their proportion in the population. And Pacific Islanders, actually in California, have a mortality rate. They are dying at 3 to 4 times their proportion in the population. So we know that certain people are suffering, especially during the pandemic, and it has to do, of course, with a historic lack of equity in the healthcare system, and that's been going on for decades. So that's why I have been a huge proponent of the Health Equity Act, which is something that we have introduced in Congress to try to address the inequity in healthcare access. For instance, for AAPIs, did you know that with hepatitis B, we are 6% of the US population, but we are 50% of the hepatitis B cases? I mean, that's astounding. What's going on there? There should be targeted programs to address this issue for the AAPI community. In fact, that's what we've done, focused on making sure that those resources are indeed there. But let me also say that I have worked very hard on certain issues, example, paid family leave. When there is a pandemic like this, what is so important is to be able to take time off, to have the comfort and the peace of mind that you can take time off, not only to be sick yourself, but how about for caring for the family members in your family. There are many people who did not have paid family leave. I do have to tell you, in California, we are luckier because we were one of the few states that actually implemented this very early on. But across this nation, there are many, many people that did not have that. And so that was my one priority, to make sure that we had paid family leave, especially in the COVID-19 relief bills, for everybody in this entire country. And in fact, we were able to get it, but then it was confined to only certain populations. That is, paid family leave only for children if your children were in a school that was shut down, and only if you worked in a company that had employees less than 500. Well, in the HEROES Act, which I talked about, which would be our 6th COVID relief bill, we would correct that and have paid family leave for taking care of any sick person in your family, and also for those companies that have 500 or over. So those are just some of the things that we're doing to help minority and women during this time of the pandemic.
Very good information that, and very good things that you're doing right now to represent the AAPI community and the US at large. So our last question, how do people integrate into mainstream American culture?
So, that's such a good question, because, our AAPI population, in contrast to other communities of color, we have the highest percentage of those that are immigrants, that is, those who are born in another country. We have 70% of our population that have come from another country, whereas, say, for the Hispanic population, it's 40%, and for the Black population, it's 10%. So what it means is that we have quite a few people who've come from other countries where maybe the democratic traditions that we have are not familiar to them. And that is the systems of voting, of registering to vote, of being involved in the census, of volunteering and getting involved, say, with your school PTA or with the commissions of your city. Those things may be very new. And so what we have to do is to make sure that we encourage our immigrants to be able to do that. Our parents, our newly arrived immigrants, to be able to do that. Of course, the first tool is making sure that they have the English language ability that they need. And that's why English language classes and civic education classes are so important. We need to make sure that if they can do it, that they become US citizens. That is the main way that they can protect themselves from any terrible actions that could happen in the future from anybody trying to take any rights away from them. And so we should be encouraging everybody to become a U.S. citizen. We should be encouraging them also to register to vote, and to vote. Now, we can do it in the comfort of our homes, especially in California. And in fact, part of our HEROES Act is we're trying to get vote by mail across this nation. Actually, we're calling it vote at home. We're calling it something different. Vote at home, where you will be safe, where you can make sure that you do not get infected by anybody else. It's especially important now during COVID-19 that you can vote at home. But it is also so important for people to do that, to express themselves through that vote. And finally, it's the census. I hope all of you can encourage your parents, your family members, your cousins, anybody to make sure they fill out that census form. Why? Because our future depends on it. The accessibility of adult education classes where people could learn English, that is dependent on our numbers, on having a good outcome on the census. And so everything actually is dependent on the numbers that we have in the census, the numbers that we have for transportation, the numbers that we have for our schools, the numbers that we have for our main programs, such as SNAP, which provides food for those who need it. All of that depends on our numbers. And in fact, our very political system depends on it. And in fact, it is possible that we could even lose a seat in Congress, and that seat could even be here in the San Gabriel Valley, if we don't have enough people answer the census, because they redo the numbers depending on the census numbers. And places like Texas look like they're really increasing their numbers. We in California look like we are maintaining our numbers. But if another number is increasing, another place is increasing, then they could get more seats, but at our expense. So everything depends on that. And I hope that you encourage everybody in your life to fill out that census form.
Now I'll pass it on to Erica.
All right, so I understand that you representatives have to hop off to another meeting. So I'm very grateful that you were able to attend, and thank you so much for speaking.
Well, thank you. I'm just so encouraged about all of you being so involved and being so organized. Really, it's so great that you're interested in all these issues. I really believe you are the future leaders of America. So I look forward to doing more with you and in making sure that we can work on so many issues that are important to us together. Thanks.
Thank you so much.
Bye.
Thank you.
Thank you.
All right, so before you guys go, make sure you sign up for the census if you haven't already. Please start conversation on this, and also Isabel will be posting our socials once more if you want to join us. Thank you so much for coming.
Thank you.
For Ally board members, please stay after. We're going to have a short debrief.